Yeah.
I'll send it to you unlisted, and then if you're okay with it,
Dude, the relief that coursed through my body when I saw it, it was like insane.
I was actually
That's why I messaged in the Slack last night. I was like, oh, I'm so excited over team we were getting into. Watch out.
I know Isaac loves just not talking about it.
Actually, Isaac, he only talks up top. Oh my god.
Was it Euro chips and pepper?
Yeah,
What's this from? I thought you were supposed to click on. Oh, where? Where's the?
Oh, girl.
I am not fighting 6 hours for a heavy fit. Absolutely not. Probably. No, this is my last term until college after. My SAT is to get up to 12 actually it's 13 minutes. I got 800 reading and 5 reading.
Good, Michael, when did you say you're reading?
Probably like January, or once my SAT is out. Like, once my math score on the SAT is out, the all
You're for another 3 months.
yeah.
Oh, Jill's did it.
What?
Are you waiting on anybody?
Yeah, Jill did it.
What? Me?
Oh, wait, no, Dylan's here. Oh, wait, what? Oh, I just. Okay, is anyone not good?
Is there?
There's an email chain. Oh, unless you guys.
I don't have those.
Okay.
Also might be in spam. It was sent a while ago. Or
First, inherency, the court has upheld the legality of defense secretary Austin's withdrawal from the plea agreement with the conspirators by the September 11 attack. Christopher accepted on court action of legal decision, which several cases were appealed to them. Recently, on the 25th of the committee, would have been ruled that for capital trial within days, Austin legally appointed judgment. He was bound to the contradiction of the court of appeals found Austin illegal authority withdrawal since the sentence of violation of the military court should not stand up the appeal, but they plan on appealing the decision by percent alone because understand the appeal full really full court, full appeals court or Supreme Court or both. Thus, the plan in the United States criminal justice system in the case of the prosecution of the conspirators of the September 11th attacks plea bargaining is just. Advantage one, the advantage is credibility, double standards on the war on terror, brutalized international law credibility. South 21 since 9/11, I ensure there's going to be some global war on terror with the really lines on war terror. Any torture roughly not really limited. No, violent HR harm democracy against the U.S. and eroded credibility of the West and democracy advantage of advocates of law undermine the integrity of that law altogether. They're quote bleeding credibility due to lack of legal rules. 24 bills permission legal credibility system. People also shut down the law to go through accountability and finality. But the plan restores international law compliance with global law, allowing 24 opportunity laws for U.S. include our legal agreements for human rights and family suffering. Then show the right chapter of my law compliance following decades of torture, highlights arbitrary doesn't contribute to IHR, allegation of U.S. and please I and these cases of any rights and for shelter of my level. The Jew regime of the change the U.S. and legally compromised litigation based on remarkable international law innovation system on relevant standards of psychological conformity followed by government last defining of cruel and inhumane treatment as a matter of Iowa. Life sentence is a Goldilocks that restores credibility of by ending a quote double standard. Offense 14 in Muhammad should not be executed victim of legal treatment as treatment CIA 180 times accountability. At least sentencing of terrorists one is one of few tools that remain for addressing abuses of law, restoring America's reputation for dedication to Allah and Muhammad should use very executions that disaster methods, but impunity for torture and rule of law U.S. is about trying to international justice. Accountability would make sense to think so for next to Muhammad would be moral and don't torture by defining legal consequences for the person of Jews but is not stated by solely little values in the abstract and them in practice. Life sentence of less than charges the Egyptian government pay a price eyeglass assault extinction code 20 U.S. promoting rights based forms of basis for system to end war and central values driven governance and permanent attacks on all world problems by crimes ignoring rights and resolution of rights retaining deposition and COVID left refugee in U.S. nation matters including making urgent American rule of law laws as assault extinction master 21 U.S. enemies government laws and complete terror and arranging for U.S. to so the will that probably deliver this history just serving office for but rule of law because of Germany Rwanda Argentina from Turkey Syria and Iran there are many problems including war and hunger oppression refugees and national security and must be renewable to combating corruption and disease framing standard is consistency hedonic act alternatives quantitative soft and controversial one naturalism where episodic treated by non-natural facts are discussable top and 20 opposite constitution natural constitution number 5 light then the moral facts are differentiated physical world knowledge media physical moral facts cannot influence the physical world hard to knowledge them and solve debunking what's 18 about returning problems for non-naturalism either is naturally they need to be switched by facts or the non-naturals is left with no way to explain beliefs in moral naturalism should the real need to grant the skeptic practice moral facts are natural we need to see moral facts as in the contrary to evolution facts explain the beliefs to experience and form the basis for hedonism summarizing sin about between two phenomenal information believe reliable way for real beliefs and also like on experience of form beliefs so other like would reflect on place includes good and opinions bad other beliefs from right the information those are not will have into discretion is a belief for reliable beliefs of the states are fitting within ones who can't we should admit and never believe that sense of pleasure is good and hate is bad experience which is the on Jack Friedman 23 humans are have senses such as sight and presence physical aspects and really senses moral facts argument for intuition between information reported to us by sight and set up spaces made by different people as evidence. We have available evidence widely held moral beliefs is not true to our connected sickness would be evidence for moral legality humans can perceive and logically possible to deduce odd from nature law claim logical possibility of deducing moral facts from physical facts is false. Objections are self-defeating including 22 all beliefs are based on occurrences that appearance are not a source of justification and all beliefs are justified including that appearance is not a source of justification. I think 3 plus 3 is 6 because it seems that way to deny appearance to be self-defeating. 3 pain and pleasure intrinsic value and disvalue. Anything else claps to regrets and can't solve moral disagreement. 15 you've got tribes different values resolved to trade off. You have some common attributes and partialities. Social decision making we should regard everyone's interests as equal and others for everyone's happiness. If you stay envy that you value and keep asking why you ultimately come down to quality of experience with pleasure and pain and good considered for resolving complete discrimination is to produce the best overall experiences. 4 actions facts statements utilities internet intentions and every decision must consider trade-offs that outweighs these different agents and different obligations and the resolution of values and morality of the United States criminal justice system is an ensemble not an individual person. Impact health 1 extinction it outweighs. We have an overall obligation to minimize excess risk under any framework involving to extinction bad name moral theory failure duty community. Humanity rights only makes sense in the political community. We comprise our entire species. Humanity's cultivation makes sense in every culture, especially if point of view is always saying all good actions are the win long-term goals. Meaningless if we were last generation, values of blood, and a flow of generations. Most like living, despite life's failures, staying otherwise fatalistic and nausea. 10 you have many satisfied desires, many most of the time being experienced by love, suffering, even if one has a lesser desire, and satisfied goal desires to raise a family, have a career, stay healthy, and society, and count substantially. My value, my life makes them valuable. For me, it is up to a being to determine her life. There are limits to how wrong people can be about their own well-being. To think people can be wrong as natural suggestions, essentially controlling physical examination is not going to get the people desire themselves to know intent for state states like intentions. You should bring the responsibility. Doc 7 intending for state you should be responsible for use interesting. Most consideration applied to state action, global friendly to taking governance, and no special relation pursuing interest, life your research for responsibility. Like individuals are predictions statistically accurate. Burke Brown 14 statistical theories options are pretty complex central limit theory. If something is a result of fast a number of influences slowly follow the algorithm, the consequences shaped by influences not mean distribution, unpredictable variety of influence allow pattern converge not assume your clues because of influences. We think you should vote AF because it's a good idea. The following is irrelevant for the purposes of the YZ. Talking about how the way the U.S. tortured people, committed violence and credibility and destruction during the war was bad is necessary to challenge the rhetorical frames and subject Muslims that hate crimes for being labeled as terrorists. While 24 exclusion Muslims just after 9/11 results U.S. commitment to state violence justified through criminalization, humanization, humanization of Muslim construction. Muslim predisposed violence, angry barbary, position is solely as perpetrators never victims, being a very victim, claims absence, rhetorical memory, constitution, memory, warring, terror, centering Muslims have been victimized and exists now, memory, born terror driven, state narratives, Muslim media justified violence against Muslims. The plan is in line with an abolitionist pedagogy. It's a necessary, although insufficient part of shutting down Guantanamo Bay and advocating for it is good. Back to me now, Trump strongly opposed to closing Guantanamo. He shut the prison down. Closing Guantanamo will only happen. We finally speak for many agreements advocating for the closure of this lingering injustice must remain an essential part of working towards the world we seek. Fiat is a statement of desirability. When I say Nazis should stop killing Jews, we're critiquing Nazis. Similar, when we say the state should engage in party in 9/11 case, we're critiquing the state for 2015 mutual abuse over justice. Be clear, I think it is absolutely heroic and noble when critiques a lot of people's actions, but it's a lack of investigation. The global social system like U.S. citizens not demanding the government redistribute wealth, capital, law. To see people turn to each other for aid. This is due to the anti-state rhetoric. The state is not just prisons under the military. It is also has sharp public education. The library, clean water, market clean water. Process.
Wait, Mark, where?
Parenti, clean water.
Okay. Okay, I want to talk about the inherency. Pfeiffer evidence tells you that they plan on appealing the decision, but it says that they'll decide the next steps. Where in the evidence does it say they plan on appealing?
It says they plan on appealing. They're deciding who to appeal to, but they still want the plea deal. I.e.,
No. Like, wait, what?
No, they plan on just appealing the decision. The next step is whether they are pursuing Supreme Court or the Federal Court of Appeals. They're deciding which one will give them a better case. The evidence is really specific, and we've read tons of other
but
evidence. They
appealing the
obviously want a plea
decision,
deal.
wait, does appealing the decision lead to, like, them actually winning in court?
Okay, our argument is that we have fiated that our argument is that it is just for there to be plea bargaining. The court the court decision
So,
has
okay,
banned
sure,
plea
wait,
bargaining.
that makes sense.
Wait,
No, this is important. You say fiat. How is the plan text a action?
We need to clarify.
What do you fiat?
We need to clarify. We are fiating that plea bargaining happens. The reason why plea bargaining cannot happen is because the court has
Sure, but
banned
your
it.
plan text, what about your plan text as a fiat mechanism?
Wait, we just think we think first to prove that something is good, it obviously has to exist. So normal means would be for the act to exist. Like this is like saying, in the United States TGS criminal plea bargaining is just, but then plea bargaining doesn't exist. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay, that's sure. That's fine. I want to talk about naturalism. Why is pleasure good?
Pleasure is good, which is an intrinsic aspect of it. For example, when we feel pleasure, we recognize an aspect of it as goodness. I.e., when I see.
Wait, what about me?
What?
Do you know if I like pleasure?
Everyone thinks pleasure is good and pain is bad. For example,
Wait,
if you touch a hot stove,
Wait, are you sure?
recoil.
No,
I mean, if I went up to you and beat you up right now, you probably don't like that. So.
I mean, how do you know?
I mean, like you want me to try it. I mean, I personally would not because it would hurt my.
But like exactly, but how would you know? Like how would you know I feel pain?
We have an argument about like how most people, for example, I believe this, and there's never been a person who has put their hand on a hot stove and been like, yeah, this is super chill, I'm fine with this. Like, if you can provide a counterexample of like a person who's like totally fine with pain and stuff.
Okay, whatever. States must use util because they don't have intentions. Why does not having intentions default to util?
Okay, if the 1 in C says like con, so okay, the 1 in C says like con, and you're like, well, we should care about intentions. If there's no intention, you can't prioritize intentions.
But I'm confused why that defaults to util.
If you can provide a framework that uses
it doesn't default.
it justifies the consequences over intentions. If you can provide a different consequential framework, sure, it's legitimate.
Grunwald you have a normative obligation to minimize existential risk. Why is it bad under any moral theory? Like, why
The
do
Greenwald
you
evidence-
presuppose that every moral theory?
The
under
Greenwald
any-
evidence says it would destroy all collective ends that are valid under any ethical theory. For example, if you read Hobbes, it would destroy the sovereign. If you're in Kant, it would kill.
It's still consequentialist, correct?
We agree consequences matter. That's what the whole point.
Yeah, then how would that outweigh under non-consequentialist
There's
framework?
no, we think that consequences matter under every
Okay,
framework
so-
for our 10-4 distinction arguments.
Okay, sure. Okay. I'll send the minutes. No, it's not. Okay, you're staying. Where is? Oh, is everyone good?
I have it. I have downloaded. Okay, I think it'll there we go. Hey, what's the order?
Seven inches. Alright, is everybody good?
Not yet. Seven? You said seven?
Yeah.
Interpretations of members count specify an area of plea bargaining to defend violation to defend. In the case of the prosecution of conspirators in September 11th, attacks concerning moral statements, murder, wrong. After now we have generic, maximum generic. Let me substance negates the affirmative to prove the regularity of justice across enough circumstances to make express information about particular events. Can also express regularity about the world constitute generalizations, conditions, tied to regularity. Generic sentences do not denote a connected series of events and moral judgment prefer interpretation. One limit allowing the act to be permitted by reaching common defendant's rights ability to prepare that awaits every benefit of the debate relies on one prepared gender to ground the interpret develops a bidirectionality justifies the advantages in other form of plea bargaining force and negative to the margin of literature or uniqueness found through grammar is the only objective truth that determines return and preparation ad hoc progress of the resolution can never satisfy debatability and by competing interpretation reasonability to logical advice unprecedented to judge intervention destroys limits to constantly shifting goalposts reject arguments topicality the aberrant no one condition stop interpretation act must defend status quo plea bargaining violation that was crossed the defend act or get no close honesty because the evidence doesn't say that the appeal will be confirmed by the Supreme Court or both courts 5 for 7 defendants must decide whether to appeal will decide next step winning that plea bargaining is requires describing the current world present tense attentive of purpose the time of speaking habitual always necessarily true and justice requires sustaining the current system via its background lower source to actually be injustice to practical call for change absent special circumstances describe it as justice and present reason is a presented reason to support sustain and rendering it irrelevant even facts about feasibility prefer limits their interpret justifies many changes to any aspect of plea bargaining and you justify utopian fear to change the world before affirming the resolution they can modify criminal laws for different distinct crime types or regions or defendants make individual bargaining of the weak off topical ground their interpret develops a bidirectionality and justifies the advantage of the other form of plea bargaining also done above next off interpretation one theory must render DTA visibility no RBS paradigm must be the two and but overcover theory because the issue must be skewed to resolvability you always attach to a response that we lose or you intervene on new one error paradigm issues a new one error paradigm anyone into theoretical often introducing them that allows them to be more rigorously tested next off the presentation of impacts or debate into a difficult next deplatform the 1AC paragraph 93 debates community that has culture signals fascination that strategy that sort of game language is powerful and has used material consequences of language is real implication for how we act is imperative we critically examine our discourse we may not be able to change the world by changing our community but conclusive meta-analysis confront with thesis 1025 with types of MS hypothesis entire literature of studies 825 effects other tools rate off meta-analysis with optimistic PET, you imprecise estimates that may reflect publication bias and pure pessimism not the really evaluated peaker intuitive visual test alongside no alpha from the uncorrected random effects more precise replications have only been more successful over time 1025 evidence that supports the MS says the individual studied more than chance 2011 revealed by two peaker studies underestimated given larger effect than our meta-analysis suggest replication will be more successful they include now convention other receive more detailed guidance morality tellings is directly correlated with chronic stress and heart failure 25 psychological threats rigorous response of the biological system cortisol mediates metabolic cardiovascular reproduction processes blunted responses related to disease stress responses contribute to risk for disease release of cortisol awareness of rises the intensify psychological responses conditions that signal mortality through responses good chronic early lifestyle operation by the system developed to mediate adaptive responses are finding suggest death contemplation triggers highly sensitive faster response responses. The amount of triggering immediate psychological aggression against perceived outgroups that culminates in racial discrimination, fascist electrodes, and foreign intervention. 123. Research in 20 countries investigated TMT MS motivates people to fortify meaning by de-aggregating with those with different beliefs, with deaths and focal attention, defenses are instigated, denying vulnerability, that thoughts remain accessible, this instigates world descent, imitation, mortality, abuse, disaster, terror, economic instability, environment, and pandemic reminder of the same effect, accountability, death policy, increased world defense protocol, people become dominant, intolerant, large body of research that people respond by derogating different beliefs, American social hostility and aggression, support for nuclear chemicals, willing to self-sacrifice, support for Bush and Trump over Clinton in response to MS Christian, favorite Christian, negative evaluation of Jewish MS, increased anti-Islam attitudes, MS participants report greater preference for cigarettes as framework, the absence justifies the presentation of the airbus fired away in case subject formation is the impact each link of the data that always raise some accessibility with the prerequisite access and fairness and thought, where rhetoric unconsciously most mentioned prohibition with the balance symbolic value just runs English 13. When you convert those words with symbols in terms of the repetition reflect the memory bypass the reason as you call subjects mind knows are associated with that activated subconscious emotion determines what conscious has to argue the brain makes it based on which will deliver neurochemical simulation consonance between internal and external pleasurable distance unpleasant with repeated exposure the brain is constituted to screen out alternative discourse that becomes addicted to mindlessness habituated engagement develop tolerance and requires increasingly elevated levels of stimulation if the substance rhetoric the craving may increasingly attenuate impressions but balance tolerant often with warming debates over time to the culmination of balance even if individual rounds out any other standards question making to IBI reject evidence became the victim makes it impossible since we have to be 100% to reject prejudice practices magnifying and adjusting independently model cells and one framework arguments that encourages the feminist framework to digital research of developed class MS causes worldview defense of preventing and makes debaters open to different arguments when applied to debate our offense outweighs reminders maximize judgment making the practice antithetical fair value 17 TMT research and legal debate mortality and the outcome of research examining jurisprudence attitudes cognitive processing information for experience girls follow the recall and interpret evidence more unfavorable for the defendant reduce anxiety associated with death and significant associated defendant found guilty 3 winners when the legitimacy and foster memory only our evidence is the context of the competition knows is it winning 120 rankings are the studies document heritage ranking competitors scholars person rankings include non should be maintain the behavior higher rank other no fairness impact one to include non-resolution procedure even worth leaving with no recourse to infinite conduct disclosure trick to defeat three sides ensuring the game is globally fair like get to the first last and infamous speech on for 1 hour skills of authors main office with the 2 hours to show the PMT every 2 hour out for theory that specify actor 1 hour 16 zeros all ground fight compartmentalize fair to do let's Korea procedural fair not concerned with the outcome of the decision for rather the process itself with fair next stop ethical be an operator only way to close it is like not an experience this turns out hyper-contemporary statements cannot lead to morally concluded related conclusion we live in a world objects however ethical judges saying that something is true about the world no matter how we feel about it and between fact and value foundation and moral falsity, not just falsely competing ethical, and other concepts that may be mistaken and mean pleasurable styles, whether the pleasure also good, cut that card then. This is the practical reason for global jurisdiction overall ethical decision making providing closed there's wide range also behind any risk causes false positive. Verse 22. All enterprises fall under agency engaging enterprises engaging agencies inescapable agency disclosure on the reflective assessment implies assessment and say agency walking up by agency untold even after reflection by agency we cannot respect the reflecting that and it's just popping new because it's the only thing that we can access it. Center sensitive with categorical comparative ethics on our plus area about the both 21. A connection between morals and categorical imperatives the reason I only with without contradiction life promises no room to believe in morals are operative because truth is prescriptive universality makes them a possible operator experiencing all contexts impossible induction circular and principles of the uniformity principle and there's just when you eliminate the project circular argument detective inference follows the most observed after most after G such arguments principles of uniformity principle the natural idea that it was not sufficient unless the research is successful in the future which rely on UP in the past there are more arguments that rely on UP succeed but this depends on UP which are trying to justify negative plea bargaining form of course torture safeguards including safeguards are illusory and voluntary elements 78 torture and plea bargaining with including guilty confession that way safeguard eliminating adjudicated function coercion probable guilt and condemnation safeguard illusory the agreement and coercion embodies involuntary no way another guilty contradiction or lying position the division of bargaining develop their own constituency perception permissibility gay one act can say nothing and when for proposition require proper positive justification for bringing us as or one moving force acceptable logical validity of a contradictory proposition regarding subject nothing else i.e. one nothing about p one have to prove presume pmt or not prove next off interpretation debaters must specify delineating text in the way want to see whether there are operators or not clarify operators independent reasons from such a value they don't expect normally create hidden operator proven the educated value of experience class which creates a competitive incentive to explore debaters the learning disabilities facts also others debaters contest arguments and decide not sort of teacher normally outweighs the scope of debate through and outweigh theory debates required to get there and theory debating as requires from clear things that getting to LD drops the debate around us become inaccessible to views competing interpretation rates the top for the best known area you don't get the win for being fair case consequential on YouTube while cascading every action has infinite semi consequences because every consequence influences the necessity of affairs making predictions thinking here and arbitrary instead we requires evaluating the state of affairs following the action meaning we can't truly evaluate whether the action was good after it was taken to 3 culpability would hold X agent is culpable for saving Y from downing and turn into a mass murder which causes agent's motivation to be moral because agents can't control what they're being punished for I'll do that line here after effects wrong it's not fallacy just because governments use this doesn't mean they ought to they can still be deontological like do the Constitution and extinction doesn't outweigh under because we reject consequentialism and it doesn't outweigh there's no shared duty to save all of humanity all of our induction answers answer that go up to fairness. 5 internal, the only impact debate is what we learn from it. There's no impact of fairness if it results in a competition geared to trade students and genius worldview. 7 constitutionalism, judges are educated in the paradigms geared to educational audience, chapter 24 paradigms are geared to engage with educational audience. Cut that there.
What did you?
I skipped on the critique, the gatekeeping this ad. On the competency, I skipped the Klein evidence, the NSDA evidence, the Hatching evidence, the Crocker evidence, and the Screwscribal evidence.
Like on the deck.
No.
I didn't.
And then I didn't read the second on case thing.
The reforms act, right?
I did not read that.
Anything on that. Okay. Let's talk about the death. Okay, you've read this card that says that it's like psychologically verifying because when people like rankings are part of people's standing. It says from college sports rankings, people are fascinated by how they're ranked. Like thousands of people watch college sports. Obviously, like you'd be worried about thousands of people think of you. There's like 10 people in this room at most.
Wait, that's not what the evidence is saying. The evidence is saying that like people in the activity mimic those who win. So if you give us the ballot, it's going to foster mimicry of our model of debate, which is good.
Okay, so Zion won the TUC reading like pessimism. It's not like everyone in LD now reads pessimism. Why is that?
Sure, but our argument is people have mimicked Zion. Like his pessimism docs are out there. People are using them. People are using them.
Do you think it's more model like people like going and like transcribing like your speeches and then reading them back?
No, but it's understanding that we shouldn't read arguments like util or arguments that like make.
But people still answer.
And like also one-off impact and one-off examples don't disprove our structural claim about competition. Like this is like in the context of competitive activity.
Okay, example after example. Swiggle, you won the TOC, you went for indexicals. It's not like every app goes for indexicals. Like, how does this debate?
But sure, there's arguments, like there's also counter examples I can prove. Like one-off, like for example, people started reading the critique, it started picking up ballots. It wasn't originally a part of debate, but people are reading the critique.
Okay,
like,
so
people
saying ballots create norms. Okay. College policy debate, nobody reads disclosure theory, everyone discloses. Why is that?
Sure, even if it's not, okay, again, I don't know if you're gonna keep on asking me one-off examples, but I can also provide other one-off examples about like norms that are being
okay, this is fine, okay.
Like,
let's talk about this T argument about the definition, about like moral statements.
Sure.
When we go and research the topic, how are we meant to like know how how are we meant to like research like intricacies of like grammar, and how do we know that that is going to be the basis for research?
Well, our argument is that the words in the resolution is what determines predictability because that's what we practice.
Okay, so the words.
Grammar is like the study of language, so that is just literally how precision is derived.
Because you could not define a single word in the resolution. How could we have?
Yeah, well, our argument is that the way that, like, since a resolution is an ethical statement, the way you affirm ethical statements is not by affirming a subset, but rather the regularity of that ethical statement.
Okay, sure. This, like, T is argument. It says is means present tense. Why is the af being immediate not sufficient for that? To get that?
Because you're not defending this well.
Okay, like
it's
when you say ought,
odd.
like on another topic, if you said ought, yeah.
It's not odd. This is not odd.
I was, it was a meta. I was giving an example. It's fine.
Wait, like different parts of those different words.
Yeah. Wait, you read this like permissibility and consequentialism and utilitarianism?
Yeah, I read some of those points. Which one? I read cascading, end states, culpability. Yeah, I think it was right first. Okay. the answer to actors? Is that fallacy? Constitutions prove that the government's going to be deontological.
Remaining, sending it out. The order, actually, wasn't it? The order is the advantage T subsets T is theory hedge depth K a priori spec contency consequentialism fails thing.
I feel like there's consequentialism fail stuff on case. I don't know how important that is.
Oh, okay.
It said it was labeled as on the docs, so I just assumed it was like.
Okay. I can. Okay.
If you could move it, that'd be lovely.
Okay. Yeah, I'll move that to the top line.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat the order?
Okay. It's the advantage, and like the framing stuff that was put on case. T subsets. T is the theory hedge, the depth K, a priori spec, and then the contingency.
But you move the util stuff.
Yeah. Is anyone not?
Sorry.
The advantage of Lynbrook idolizes Iowa by creating any double standard on the war on terror against false conversion, ex-military is dropped, and the consequentialism, and C cascading is the answer by CLT because it converges through a bell curve. Culpability is wrong because util is just about states of affairs, not inflammatory to people, and C is wrong because util by predicting consequences. T subsets, counterprediction against subsets, writing in means subsets, KC9, JavaScript defense, it is within the bounds of the stock price, something completely negative, C side 1, ground litigation, advantage, non-unique plans, plan key, and negative kind of one place, so offense, yeah, as a key snake, but there's no unified plan, you warrant functional limits, inherency, literature check, nobody's advocates, and generic solve, van, writing, case of criminal justice and factors, solve, grammar is modified by the definitions, to prove the subset is universally true, which means grammar is not the basis. For practicing this hard research, abstract and hard to research, reasonability only vote in T, but always substance are quite otherwise. Teams waste some margins for tiny shells. T is we meet. They'll win their appeal in the status quo. Just they don't know where they'll do it, which wasn't specified in the plan. Counter term. F is to immediate. Arbitrary interrupt just make primary interrupt only RF. It's most limiting. 1. F ground defending status quo means no reversal until solvency exists. 2. Precision eating cookies is fun. It's true even if I'm not eating one right now. 3. Functional limits. Cross-apply from the other. T. We don't go for reform maps. That's extra T. It's not in any part of resolution. Reasonability. Also cross-apply the theory hedge. Not going for theory, so it's totally irrelevant. But we get reason 1 year for paradigm issues like reasonability. So you press the answer for theory. You can't preempt every paradigm issue. It doesn't include offense. It's just for answering arguments, and including the 1 year is better than not including anything at all. Death kick. Disruptor reps are good. It's key for us to discuss the way that we heard the whistle. That impacts the key way. For instance, that's how we heard whistles in the war on terror. By accepting the U.S. is wrong, and only impact death impacts show the scale of what we did do both. Death reps are good because the drop death is bad. For all of our evidence about paternalism, so it's good to prevent it. Framework only evaluate plain desirability. 1. Fairness. If it happens to length and tiny, takes smooth cover the resolution. Fairness outweighs better fairness than winning. Instead of for everybody to be responsible, logical things to be fairly validated. No turn. The fairness defense. No turn. You can beat this arguing on competition or substance. It's bad. Diffusion is wrong because they cause the fairness in this round. And fairness in some amount, and it means that neg would always win, which is making makes debate terrible, flexes and overcorrection because they make debate impossible for the act. A spec, counterpressure, we don't specify agent, accountable through substance, and cross-ex concede, and cross-ex check concede that reasonability and compartmentalization is unfair to choose some parts of fairness and not others, which is definitively bad. It would be an unfair valuation for you to set the burden. It would be unfair valuation for you to set the burden for the neg and only negating reps. Constitutionalism is let's have the website, not tab the tab room at the tournament, so it's not binding on anyone. Now, their offense is wrong. We don't internalize arguments. We read one structural factors, beliefs ingrained for the rest of our lives away. It affects the process of switching sides and competitive attachments to competitive incentives. Balance will take by troops and bears won't move the blocks. Not changed by its balance almost is wrong. Over time is done by things out of the round, like coaches talking to people. No solvency isn't picking them blaming because it applies to everyone. And unconditionally affirming them to the ballot hurts her causes clinging to the ballot and hurts them because it means that once they leave, they don't get the ballot, then they will feel like they were bad people. Ranking things about sports when thousands of people are watching, and it's wrong in the context of this round because we both believe that we were right or wrong. Now, a priori spec contribution. I don't specify this a priori in the 1C, one ground, and they can't specify every minutiae, so whatever I don't expect, they ought to win. 2 education, 4 1C. Justify 1 boost critical education, 3 concentrate better, 4 sense context skills, cross-line reasonability, which are not res theory, unpeople steps are possible before, which turn norming. Now, the contency actor spec is a side constraint on everything. All the states don't have intentions. It's not answered not by intent force. It's not answered by Izod Gabby's argument. It's literally impossible for a state to have an intention, so it's incoherent under con. But con so it's incoherent con zeros everything else because states just can't use this. Use con on level individual, but use on level states. Con affirms 1 contract. There's no valid justification for winning the plea bargain. Breaking a contract is lying, which is a contradiction of contention. That's Rosenberg dropped. They also the Constitution defense is wrong because the offense is wrong. Otherwise, obviously slavery was legal at one point, but banning it would but it's bad. Which proved by contract offense. The coercion stuff is wrong. Affirms 1 coercion. Plea bargain stands to defend freedom. Young 23 coercion, not quantity influence rather. Kind of are wrong. A choice wrongful. Benefit freedom mind goes coercion. Any sweet 90% option given rights. Court inflection flip the question to the offer. So it's right. Offer was unfair, but the gap was not right enough. John Young, Bradley Lynn, fears on judgment, defendant chasing sentence. Then who accepts the slap on the wrist who will not say that defendant offering is a plea equivalent. Defendant not change options available. Should not fetch over defendant autonomy. Confuse objectivities for injustice in the institution. 2 trial penalty. It's good. Young 3 trial penalty defense on the equality to be avoiding differences. Distributional equity. Court job revealing state relational equity of avoid domination. If you people no person doing the domination expect one's own self choice electoral instead of plea bargaining free of inequality. Suppose the choice is free. Similar defendants are given similar offers. Market offers.
5 minutes. Did you say capsules?
I think I said judge. Let me make sure I didn't say that before no, I did not say capsules. I got worse judges.
Answer to compartmentalization.
I said it would be like the definition of unfairness. The judge would choose one type of fairness over another. And also, you are fairness in evaluation not outcome because the judge is unfairly evaluating by setting a lower burden for the
Answers to subject information.
Answers subject information. There's two things. First was structural factors. Second was competitive incentives, and then I lined one up.
And double down was what? Double down was mentioned.
I don't know what double down means. I made arguments like competitive incentives, but like I didn't say double down. Like if you explain to me what double down means, maybe I said it.
Like people. Okay. Continue. Take it last one.
Like what part of like what's the internal link? What's the impact? Like,
impact.
The impact one, it's incentive for competition. You also need fairness, otherwise you wouldn't debate. The second is the paradox, which in response to logical because they need to show.
Okay. Non-resolutional theory bad.
What'd you say?
Non-resolutional theory bad.
I said it was arbitrary and unpredictable. We can't prep for like definitely.
What you said that?
We can't prep for like all of these unresolutional shells, which creates false positives for shells. Yeah.
Would you say false positive?
I don't think I said the words false positive. That would be different. With like false positive, like A or false positives.
The shell.
No, I didn't say the words.
Was it made on the critique?
No.
I'd like 4 more seconds. Any voters? Okay, let me know when everyone's voting.
Let's do it.
Order's gonna be the death guy.
One second.
Big deal. Sounds good.
Vote negative to reject. Death rap subject reminded of distinction reflect their own mortality, increasing intergroup conflict in defense of cultural world view. 20 years of evidence proves that it creates prejudice. Subjects as Jones. Morality salience was essentially dropped. They dropped every single study and didn't provide any counter studies. Prefer science analysis over high school analysis. 2 warrants. One is a meta-analysis, a P-curve of 825 effects covering the entire literature of studies. Coding the card is optimistic about morality salience. Chen answers any other type of studies. Experiments that drew negative effects were subject to publication bias and suboptimal scientific methods, while experiments best proved to measure morality salience are likely to confirm our thesis. Morality salience is the idea that when we are outwardly confronted with our own death, it creates a fundamental anxiety in the subject that spreads out in oscillating expressions of hate, violence, and prejudice. Second argument is recency. Our evidence is super recent and 25 years of research. They provided no counter studies, so prefer ours. I'll answer the death rep's good argument. They dropped accessibility outweighs from the one and which should frame out every single impact. Accessibility is a prerequisite for both fairness and education, which means every single education and warrant for death rep's good is irrelevant if we won that death reps makes debate inaccessible. I'll extend that here. Every single one of your argument on death rep's good which says that mortality is salient regardless of whether we consciously realize it, because it tells us how talking about death leads to impacts and education outside of the real world, like the war on terror, etc., all their examples. But it also concedes that morality is salient, so there's no take back. The round is only a question of whether that is good or bad, which we're winning. 2 arguments. One is heart failure. Morality salience causally affects chronic early life stress, cardiovascular disease, and high cortisol levels. That's the Bentley evidence, and even if debaters become more educated by the world around it, they won't matter if they're also dead. Second is fascism. Reminders of death increase worldview defects to cope with our own mortality that leads us to agree with those like us and bear hatred to the people outside of our cultural groups, which is the basis for all types of racism and fascism. Hunter said it increases support for Trump's nukes and anti-Islamic hate specifically. That was in the card. Next, we'll harp down on the accessibility weighing right now. Their only impact was fairness, and the argument that they really made was competitive incentives, and now we use it too, but they dropped that it's irrelevant if debate is not accessible to begin with, because if there's nobody to be fair towards or educate, it's irrelevant, and your ballot is a question of accessibility first, so you can access all the benefits of fairness and competitive debate that outweighs any marginal impact on death threats. Good, I'll do framework debate here. Framework is inseparable from the thesis debate. Debate is uniquely a cause for mortality salience because it competitively motivates debaters to rush to the biggest and worst extinction impact. Even if discussions about death threats are good, it's irrelevant because the way debate is structured and their form of debate is structured, it forces us to go to the biggest, the biggest impacts first, which actively reinforces morality salience as it plays like no other, specifically in debate. That increases subconscious confrontation with death, triggering distal defense mechanism to protect our sense of mortality by increasing worldview defense and intergroup cultural prejudice, which is precisely how morality becomes salient. That every single one of these corridor impact comes first. Death reps green light microaggressive environments by creating racist debaters, which outweighs fairness and classroom materiality. Accessibility outweighs. That was done above. I don't want to hear any 2AR weighing on fairness outweighs accessibility when it was not explicitly done in the 1AR. That would be new, and I want you to draw a line from the 1AR to the 2AR when doing any weighing between those two impacts. We have made a claim that it is a sequencing argument to any impact they can go for in the 2AR, and that also flips the direction of the fairness paradox. Vote next to minimize unfairness because they dropped the argument that morality salience in debate actively make judges more unfair. I'll do that here. Actually, no, I'll do subject formation. No subject formation is completely unwinnable. 2AR moralizing about our studies goes both ways. They must explain why speech times and competition undo scientifically verified processes. Remember, even the worst neg author is more qualified than the high school. They just dropped both pieces of evidence. One is consciousness group confidence is increased through distal defense mechanisms, meaning we react to changes unconsciously, which zeroes all their one-liner analytics and can disprove. Independently, our evidence assumes experiments that took years. So arguments about this round and specific examples just missed the boat. Second is neurology. This is the Ingram evidence, which was dropped. They did not provide any other counter arguments. The discursive stimuli trigger electrochemical responses in the brain, unconsciously shaping our minds, even when we perceive our arguments in unemotional fashions. We've switched sides, etc. The effect is empirically validated by studies on neuroplasticity and entrenched through repetition. That's Ingram, which means each time somebody reads arguments like theirs that pushes to the margins about death, it leads to more things like racism, fascism, etc. in debate. And every single word in every single round is a cite of that. That was the Ingram evidence, which was dropped. They also dropped the Weingarten evidence, which is damning for them because it tells you that in the context of competitive debate is that that people mimic, because of competitive incentives, people mimic those who win, even if they go for arguments like double down. It doesn't matter because double down is not true in the context of competitive environments, which is a study done in competitive environments, is that people who, other debaters and other people want to mimic those who win. So you give us the ballot that's going to make more people read our type of arguments and decrease morality salience in debate. I'll do the line by line here. Double down. That was done above. Structural factors, it's irrelevant because the ballots are uniquely key. Even if structural factors have a small effect, we've won the way that people actually mimic other debaters and actually spread scholarship throughout other rounds is through the ballot, because other debaters want the ballot. That is their competitive, that's their competitive incentives warrant. I'll do the fairness stuff here. Absent accessibility. Morality salience turns fairness. 4 experiments prove judges score worse on information processing and negative attitudes when reminded of their own mortality, increasing the chance they make worse decisions. That's the Chivers evidence, which was dropped. There's no other carded evidence made on this. Reject any analytics because you have carded evidence about how morality salience in judge-based activities and judge settings actually reduces fairness and the ability for the judge to process information enough to make a coherent decision, which turns the fairness paradox to make debate unfair until we enact a model, which means any risk of subject information being true or the Weingarten evidence being true means you vote negative. But also the paradox is wrong. That was done above. 2, non-verifiable. We pref you because you guys actually, you know what? No, that's actually not. 3, non-unique. Evaluation isn't exclusive to fairness. Replacing the word with anti-racism proves the logic is ridiculous. For example, anti-racism is equally paradoxical because judges can hack against you on the basis of skin color. Same can be applied to anything. No reason why fairness is the only thing that is intrinsically motivational. And they've also dropped a sequencing claim that accessibility outweighs, which means any risk outweighs. Like, there's no other studies on morality salience. They dropped that debate is a unique site. Accessibility outweighs education and fairness. That was dropped. Any new weighing. There was no counter cards or any other carded evidence with studies, which was a Weingarten evidence, Ingram evidence, and every single morality salient evidence. just prefer like.
Just wait for Curtis and Dylan to come back.
Yeah,
Sorry, just the. Sorry, advantage, then. Advanced plans also dumpster a final credibility by creating plea deals on the class with Charles extinction. They didn't say death was good, just the death reps were bad. Okay. Top level framing issue is that somehow the 200 job perm do both. I know this is silly because it's normal for framework, but the framing issue is that they also extended the old, and they didn't say judge kick. They said vote next to reject the death reps, which is their 1 and 2 for alternative arguments. So perm demonstration both shields, and they didn't have a reason for why doesn't shield, which is zero is the critique, and you should not judge kick for them because enforcing the debate multiple 2 hours, and they did not justify in the 2 hour. Now, at the top, the framing issue for this debate is that they've dropped most of the reasons why the ballot doesn't solve. The question next question in your debate should not be impacts in a vacuum, but what your ballot can do to solve them. There are 2 arguments that are conceded. First is that they drop that relying on the ballot for solvency is bad because it forces clinging to the ballot for the judge to validate you in a specific round and undo the violence that death impacts into you in this round. That's bad. Judges are mostly college students who are not in capable positions to do so, which means you should reject ballots obviously on face. Second, they dropped it. The reasons why norms change over time is because of things like coaches discussing outside of rounds. For example, for example, if you don't disclose properly, a bunch of coaches will come scream at you. Judge, they dropped the block last the blocks changed on minus me below. Now, if that is true, any risk of our fairness offense must outweigh because their answers to fairness, which is their offense turns ours. So we win defense to their offense. Our offense was 100. Their interpretation tells fairness by creating unpredictable, arbitrary prior questions, which make it impossible to be only evaluating plain desirability is the only predictable thing we know before the round. Judges being not knowing what to do when the death impacts are read was 1, like not flagged in the 1 entity, and 2 is incoherent because their ballot voting neg cannot solve that because the death impact was already read, which means voting neg does not undo the unfairness. So they don't access this fairness. It's a linear fairness impact. They say if a paradox is not exclusive to fairness, don't need to win the paradox because they dropped the incentive for everyone to beat, i.e. they would not be in debate without fairness because they wouldn't be able to win. Even if racism is also paradoxical, the reason why racism is unfair racist evaluations are bad is because they're unfair. Now they dropped it. Now their offense is very is a crush. The framing issue is that they've read all these studies, but none of them are specific to debate. They said the burden was for us to prove why speech times change that. We will do so. The argument is that switching sides means we don't believe any of the arguments we see. For example, you can go for wipeout 1 round and then extinction another. We don't believe any of those arguments. Otherwise, you change our subjectivities every round. Remember, this is not microaggression, and it cannot only be in this round because the 1 and explicitly said it is not about this round. And the 1 and said the offense is subject formation, which means that they mean to win a model of debate. Your ballot cannot actualize a model of debate because debaters will change their blocks on their mind. And subject formation cannot answer this because even if even if people change their minds over a course of a season, the singular ballot will not, and I'll just keep reading I'll just keep reading this argument, and we're trying to beat you unfairness. Now, even if there's scientific evidence is true, it's not true in the context of debate, we don't believe arguments, they also drop switching sides, means we don't believe anything, and the fact switching doesn't believe anything. Now they say the debater, they say Turin's case is necessary to be here, that's wrong. Argument is that fairness is intrinsic good, it's like sort of like a deontological statement that fairness is always good. They say debatability is a cause for mortality. In fact, they drop all causes outweigh, which means that even if the debate is unique, the most of your life is not on debate, which means it does outweigh. The thing about microaggression is totally irrelevant because they didn't explain why death is a microaggression. It wasn't in the one and it's obviously incoherent. The thing about hopping top debaters is wrong because you won't win every round because debaters will double down.